Okay, so good morning, everybody. I would like to mention that we are recording this meeting, and let me just get this in order. Right. Okay, so finally we are off, and I would like to say good morning once again to one and all who are here with us for this national lecture series called The Last Bastion. And I am extremely happy that we have with us Lalita Ramdas, an activist, environmentalist, a citizen of great renown, somebody who is extremely vocal and has not been afraid to speak out about matters that are the need and the order of the day. And I think that as young people, all of you and all the others who are watching all over the place, I would like to say that Lalita Ramdas is somebody that we need to be inspired by, in terms of her fearlessness, in terms of the way that she has embraced technology to bring out those issues that need to be talked about, and the way that she has connected across places and she has brought human beings together in order to fight and to continue to talk about issues that need our immediate attention, be it the matter of environmental degradation, be it the matter of people being denied their citizenship, be it the matter of our democracy or our democratic rights being taken away systematically. Lalita Ramdas has been very vocal about all of these issues, and she has managed to gather under her umbrella people who are like-minded and people who are extremely committed to social issues. And this is one of the main focal points of this lecture series that we have named The Last Bastion, which is literally the last people who are standing between total anarchy or anarchy in terms of loss of control over our basic and our most fundamental rights, and of course the way things are today. So in that sense of the term, we are extremely fortunate to have with us ma'am, and she is somebody who does not stand on formalities. She loves to be called akka or even lollipop or lolly for that matter. So and at the age of 8, she is here with us talking to us about the process of learning. And one should be listening to this and taking very important notes because, these things are things that will stay with you all your life. We want you to listen to Lalita Ramdas so that you will know the ways in which, one has to think out of the box. One has to understand the experiences that people have gone through so that you can do something proactive and positive for society. Today, the world over, there is a great feeling of unrest. There is a feeling of insecurity. There are lives that are extremely precarious and lives that are in great danger. And they're not just human lives, they're also the natural world as well as the non-human entities. If somebody has to speak for them, it has to be you. And if you have to speak for them, you should have that sense of awareness and commitment. And nobody can inspire you better than Lalita Ramdas. In the months to come, we are going to see more people coming in and talking to you, talking about independent thought, talking about engaging with each other, forming networks and so on. But I'm very, very glad that the beginning is being made with Lalita Ramdas. So Akka, over to you. It's your time now.
Good morning, Sonia, and good morning to all of you. Some whom I can see, others who I can only see an initial. And obviously, the screen is telling me there are 81 plus, but clearly on my screen, I won't be able to actually see all of you. And this is perhaps the most, in a way, the disconcerting or the downside of having to do these kinds of interactions over technology like Zoom and Google and so on. But at the same time, I have to say, at least it serves to bring us together. And I think that is the most important thing. So once again, vanakkam, good morning, salam, and I am really, really happy to be here today. I also am not sure if there are any of the faculty members, but I was looking at the names on the wonderful brochure that some of you have designed. But I just wanted to say also to respected Reverend Mother Mary Francis, to Sister Belinda Pereira, to Dr. Deepa, to Dr. Sonia Nair, and a number of the other faculty members, my very grateful thanks for having actually invited me to have this interaction with all of you. It's very strange how I actually am here today, and I think I must tell you this as the first little story that I want to share. It was a complete surprise, very delightful, to hear from Dr. Sonia Nair a few days ago saying, will you be willing to address our students? And this message came onto my Facebook Messenger. While I'm very active on Facebook, I am not that active on Messenger. And I hadn't even seen it. And then suddenly I saw this and I said, oh my God, what would she be thinking of me? So I sent a message back and she said, well, look, there will be about 100 students and can you talk about gender equality? And it's interesting that I have actually never met Sonia in person. We have actually met, if you like, on Facebook. It's basically because of her poetry and the journal she edits, and that's really how we both got in touch with each other. And really, this must be a tribute to her formidable power that she actually got me to say yes without even thinking about it. And now when I'm actually here, I have to tell you, I'm terrified. I have never done something like this before, certainly not over a digital technology. And as I did warn Sonia right at the beginning, we live in a little village called Bhaimala. It's in the Alibag Taluka on the west coast, about 100 kilometers south of Mumbai. Our connectivity and networks are notorious. And although we have always had a kind of a backup, we had a broadband on BSNL and we have another private server. Inevitably, it's like Murphy's Law, the broadband server went off the air day before yesterday. And I must tell you this because for those who only live in the cities, maybe you forget or maybe you don't even realize what actually happens in rural India. We have a little local clinic about 10 minutes walk away, and somebody was challowing the JCP, one of these monstrous earth movers, and since no cables are marked in rural India, they dug up the optic fiber, they dug up whatever had to be dug up, so there's no broadband. So I'm sitting here like this and warning Sonia, in case something else goes wrong with the only other connectivity network we have, do please understand. And I've even sent her a small sort of a note that I sat up and worked on last night. Anyway, so our as I was saying, our relationship between Sonia and me basically happened over, what happens on Facebook, rather tentative. They tend to be superficial. Somebody does a like or a share. And the commonalities, it turned out, were issues ranging from gender to citizenship, to democracy, to human rights, to intolerance, to environment, to literature, poetry, you name it. But clearly, there are some positive aspects also to Facebook that they serve to bring us together and have actually served to enable this kind of interaction, which is something that I must say, ever since we've moved into this kind of area away from the cities, I have missed a certain closeness of interaction with the student community. So thank you all for being here today. I've been wondering, even after I looked at the sort of, very impressive poster and brochure that you all brought out, and she's put almost everything down that kind of describes me and who I am. Where should I begin this conversation? And I do not see this as a lecture. I really see this as a conversation. And I hope very much that you will feel free at the end of whatever little formal presentation I'm making to ask questions, to bombard me with anything that is on your mind. I think it's very important that we should feel comfortable with each other, comfortable to ask the questions that are sort of burning inside you and you probably haven't had a chance to talk about. Because the way Sonia has described all the things I do, it makes me sound like a very formidable person. I am not. And therefore, what I was going to begin to talk to you about today was a little bit about okay, who am I? And I think it's important to establish that for each one of us. And that's where I'm going to make a beginning. In the brief blurb that I sent to Sonia, I talked about some of what I saw as our several identities, which each of us carry with us. So I'm a daughter, I'm a wife, a mother, sister, grandmother, lover, many, many such identities. But they're always in some way or the other linked with the other. For me, the two most important, and which realization I've come to gradually along and over the years, is that I am a woman and I am a citizen. Unfortunately, we rarely tend to think of ourselves as independent individuals, but very often as part of an elaborate web of kinships. And the second part I thought might be, interesting to hear about. Maybe many of you have experienced it. How strongly our identities tend to get linked to a particular place or a caste or a language. We had always lived in urban areas, being a service wife and a service daughter. Our lives moved from, one naval establishment to the other for the best part of, I don't know how many decades. So when we moved to live here in this village, the first question we were always asked, where is your home? What is your caste? And what is your language? So there was considerable and understandable confusion when I began to answer that, because it was not a simple one-word answer. I told them I was born in Kolkata. I mean, now Kolkata, then Calcutta in 1940. My parents were Telugu speakers, but we children grew up in English because of English medium schools and the very nomadic life that we led, being service brats in the armed forces. My husband is a Tamilian, but he was born and brought up in Mumbai and in Delhi. So he's domiciled in Maharashtra, and which is why we now live on this piece of land, which we were given, or he was given, for his gallantry award in 1972-73. And yes, I speak some Marathi, better Tamil than Telugu, good Hindi because of my years working in Delhi, and most comfortable in English. I even have a few words of Malayalam because of a Palghat and Kozhikode connection and many, many postings in Kochi. So how would you describe me? I think that's something that I would love to hear from you later on. Let me also begin with one other important shared feature, which I think is important for us to think about. The fact that my education, like many of yours, was largely in institutions under the tutelage of a wide variety of amazing nuns and teachers who provided us with the important building blocks of learning, of comprehension, of values, and of discipline. But at the same time, when looking back over the years, I am also prompted to ask, what kind of education was it that we received, even in the best of institutions that we all went to? And I tend to call that, was it an education for domestication or an education for liberation? And I think that there's a huge world of difference between the two. And these are very, very significant, particularly in our present times. Convent education, at least in my times and even today, perhaps, was always a much sought after end by parents, particularly for their daughters, because they were confident that their girls would be disciplined and they would be brought up to be well mannered, respectful, obedient, and not go out of line. In my times, at least, we were not really encouraged to question too much. And certainly, we were not allowed to be too independent in our thinking. And although we were privileged to study in some of the best elite institutions, it was still within a framework of certain conventional norms, where most of us were brought up to believe that although it was important and good to study and to be well educated, for us as girls, our education and training was ultimately intended to prepare us for marriage, for motherhood, and to be the ideal daughter, daughter in law, wife, mother, etc. In short, housewives and homemakers. Not that I'm saying there's anything necessarily wrong with that, as long as it is a choice that we were able to make for ourselves. But for the most part, the environment did not encourage exploring other options, and which is why I do envy the multiple choices that are in fact available and opened up for young women today. My formal education did not seriously encourage independent thinking nor the courage to ask questions. And one sort of grew up accepting the fact that, all right, one would become maybe a teacher, a doctor, or take on part time work to keep up certain supplementary earnings. But even then, there were little acts of what I call little acts of rebellion. As I said, despite the conventional trajectory I followed, I did break with tradition in a substantive manner when I fell in love with a young man who was my father's ADC, aide de camp, and in the Navy they call him a flag lieutenant. And I married out of both community, caste, and yes, class. Fortunately, there was no turbulence. I slipped quite happily into a largely conventional service wife's pattern and model. I had 3 children in quick succession before the age of 25. I dutifully followed my husband from posting to posting. I attended coffee mornings and cocktail parties, which was what we were expected to do. And I oversaw the children's homework, making sure that I kept any contrary views and opinions to myself, and basically not rocking the boat, so to speak. I have gone into this in a little bit of detail because, on the one hand, you have what Sonia very, wonderfully presented as this fantastic persona who does this, who has achieved that, who's part of this great sort of, human rights activism, etc., etc. But like so many of us, my early beginnings and my socialization came from a very, very different place. And I think it is important to understand that nobody suddenly arrives at, what seems to be this kind of somewhat formidable, image that one tends to put across when you are asked to do CVs and biodatas and so on. So I worked primarily as a primary school teacher. I even ran play schools in my various homes and different postings because with transferable jobs, it was very difficult quite often to even get a job wherever we went. So I started with the nuns in whose care all of you are being given such a good education. And I talked about my own interaction with the convents and the nuns. And then at the age of 36, I was already a mother. I met up with a very different kind of nun. So I called it a different nun and a different priest, a very different kind of education to reality. That was what I call my aha moment. I was teaching in a well known Mumbai convent school, and I signed up quite unknowingly because I was a bit bored for a 5-day long course, which was advertised very innocuously as an education to reality. Oh boy, what a life changing experience that turned out to be. A sister from the Sophia College order and a Jesuit priest who was located in a small town of Betia in North Bihar ran a workshop which certainly turned my life, my thinking, our comfortable existence upside down, and I am not exaggerating. During the course of those 5 intense days, there were grueling sessions which made us do soul searching as never before and to come face to face with the harsh realities of economics, of politics, of social and religious discrimination, the hypocrisy of caste and culture, and the issues of various isms, whether it was capitalism, socialism, communism, and the positive and negative power of what I choose to call ultra nationalism. They taught us how to better understand and value the constitution of this country and to realize that we had a role as citizens which transcended all those other roles and identities which we constantly keep trying to fill because your family expects it, your school expects it, society expects it, and your workplace perhaps expects it. Sorry, may, may I continue?
Yes, I think somebody's mic was inadvertently switched
Okay.
on. That's
Yeah.
why.
So feel free. I hope I am audible and I'm not going too fast.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, good. So they, as I said, back to the Constitution, which yes, we had studied, but we studied perfunctorily and never really uh, interrogated what it was actually saying and in what way that Constitution applied to each one of us in our primary role as citizens of this country. It is also true, and I'm really ashamed to say that till that time, till the age of 36, I had never voted. That has changed drastically. I'm sure that all of you young women and a few men who are here in this audience have all voted. And particularly in Kerala, it is something that I think is very much an article of faith. So from that time onward, I promptly enrolled as a voter and exercised my franchise in every election. But being an active and a responsible citizen goes far beyond the act of walking to the booth and casting your vote once in 5 years. I believe it is largely our failure to exercise our rights as a citizen of this country between elections that has cost us dearly. But at least, as I said, in Kerala, I believe things have been very different. And the awareness and active role of the system of local self-government, the panchayats, is something which I think is a model that I wish other states in the country had followed and learned from a long time ago. So what was this education to reality? And this liberation theology, which again, you might like to look up, and probably many of you know about it already. It was actually begun in a way in South America. And there were some amazing philosophers, teachers, academics, educationists, the best known amongst them being Paulo Freire, who really developed this concept and actually took the entire framework of this, although it was within the Catholic Church, but they took it into a completely different dimension and understood what the liberating part of every religion actually ought to be. And that is again, in your avatar, if you like, as citizens living with people within society and within certain structures of society and politics and economics. Now, one more thing which I think is important at this point to just talk about briefly. It was not just I who found myself suddenly being shaken to the core by what it was that I experienced in this workshop on education to reality. It was my family that also had to deal with this, well, transformed or completely, I don't know what words they used at that time, woman, who, from being a traditional wife and mother, was out in busties or traveling to remote areas in Bastar or Betia, initially as part of the education to reality with my mentors and friends, Father Gabe and Sister Gladys. And when I was not traveling, I was out in meetings and morchas and rallies on every conceivable issue, especially then in Delhi in the late 70s and early 80s, on dowry and on rape. And this was the famous Mathura rape case, about which probably many of you have already read. And if not, I think it's important to read up about it, because that was a kind of defining moment which actually led to the formulation of all the subsequent legislation around rape. So, as I said, the late 70s and early 80s were very exciting times in the capital. My husband was posted there in naval headquarters. The women's movement was gathering momentum, and we discovered a sense of shared sisterhood and a passionate purpose to engage with and confront the many, many evils and oppressive conditions that women faced. And as I once told a Navy coffee morning in Kochi many years later, there is a sense that violence, abuse, physical and domestic violence is only something that happens in the slums or with the poor. And I said to them, this is the one thing that we need to find to understand and realize, that there is no class barriers on this. Violence is violence. Domestic violence happens in the most elite and well-to-do families as much as it happens anywhere else. And I think that our first counseling center within the framework of the Navy Wives Association actually happened after a coffee morning, you know, that typical middle class sort of pastime, in which I spoke about some of these things. And at the end of it, I had 3 or 4 women come to me and said, can we come and speak to you? Of course, I said they can. And when they did, it was to tell me about the kind of really brutal domestic violence that they were all experiencing. So sometimes it takes just a little spark, and you need to give that opportunity to someone to say, hey, come and talk about it. And then let's see what we can do together. Okay, so the next thing that I do and have always felt strongly about is what I call the personal is political. And in reverse, the political is very often the personal. I think for the women's movement, it was an article of faith with feminists. And for me personally, many of the things that I have continued to do through my own life actually have been because of making this connection with what happens to you. It then makes you feel that much more involved, engaged, and wanting to do something about it. We have 3 daughters, again, as another example of how one's awareness was one thing, but hey, am I going to actually do something about it? The answer was a very positive and definitive yes. Our daughters used to use public transport. Those of you who might have been in Delhi, who know Delhi, it's called the DTC, the Delhi Transport Corporation, to go to school and college. And they had to face, like hundreds of other women did, the daily battles against touching, groping, and every possible form of what we continue then to use the term Eve teasing, whereas it was everything else but teasing. It provided that additional impetus and a personal experiential basis to my continued battle against what is nothing less than sexual harassment, sexual abuse, and worse. And as each of you, young women, must know, it continues even till today. You might be wondering also um, about the word patriarchy. Now, again, it's interesting. I thought I was a very well educated, well traveled, woman of the world. But the word patriarchy and its actual connotations really came home to me only after my very deep engagement and interaction and immersement, really, with my women friends in the women's movement in Delhi. It was never part of my vocabulary or our vocabulary, certainly not in school and college, not even in my early years of marriage and motherhood. And it was education to reality in a way that opened my eyes. But as I said, the immersion with women's groups made one understand the true nature, the roots, and the endemic power of patriarchy over our socio religious and cultural existences. And patriarchy rules almost every sphere of our lives. And also, it's important to remember that this is not merely an Indian or an Asian phenomenon or that of any other developing world. It is to be found literally across the globe. And so, which is why we join forces and share experiences and battle patriarchy, in fact, in every corner of the world, because people suffer from its overwhelming presence no matter where they are. You might also be wondering, because many people have asked me this, you were a service wife. Aren't you bound by certain norms of what you can do and what you can't do? So, how did you deal with this? Well, this life of mine, which was outside the domestic sphere, and the deep engagement and growing engagement with issues like violence against women, religious intolerance, communalism. And how did those then gel with or contradict my own other commitments to my family and to the service into which I was married? While deciding what I would try and focus on today and seeing the large numbers of young women, I understand there may be some amongst you who are already married. I think that these are the actual practical daily dilemmas and the conflicts and the contradictions with which we as women, and to a lesser extent men too, have to learn to live with and figure out a way of making those adjustments. um, it is easier said than done, but it is of critical importance. So over the years, what I would do was to actually take time out at the end of the day, um, because there would be children who were not babies, but yes, they had been okay, not spoilt, but they had grown to expect mother would be at the door. I would have some lovely goodies and hot, some snacks available for them when they came back from school. And then all of a sudden, mother was no longer doing that any longer. Mother was out on rallies, mother was out at a meeting, mother would be, sort of shouting slogans in some morcha. How did they actually deal with this and handle this? And that is where, as I say, it is important, no matter what be your passions and your preoccupations, to try and take the family along with you and get them to understand why is it that you believe the way you do and do the things that you very often do. And I think that I have reaped very rich dividends for having actually taken that amount of time out to take the family along and get them, if not necessarily always to agree, but to actually at least understand what were the driving factors which drove me to do what I did. So over the years, if I have to explain, and I would put it again under a broad category of from being a woman to a citizen, examining democracy and what it meant, and what has been the role of the state in relation to these subjects? I would say that it has been the twin drivers of being part of the women's movement and being equally clear that since I have always worked in the field of education in its widest and broadest definition, being a system that brings forth the best in every individual, these have been the two beacons actually that have led me on to this very exciting journey, which has been an emotional and intellectual uh, discovery of things that I had never even imagined were possible, or that imagined that I would ever have the well, the courage, the conviction, or in a way, the audacity to undertake several of those journeys, which is what I actually think it calls for. The long list of the organizational CVs and institutional affiliations in my CV do reflect this somewhat expansive perspective. Oh, hello. Did I lose a connection in between?
Yeah, for about 2 minutes.
All
Not even
right.
2 minutes, actually, a minute.
Okay, let me hope that it doesn't happen again. So maybe I should, perhaps it's a signal to say that, look, hurry along and finish doing what you're doing. Here. Uh, okay, I can see that I'm um, still having a problem. But anyway, I wanted to just actually talk about communalism and the growing intolerance that we are facing, whether it's lynchings, whether it's, as I said, the love jihad, which has now become such a word that is used with complete impunity. But again, these are things which we actually face in our own lives and in our own families. When my brother decided in 1971 to marry a wonderful
Hello, Akka, are you there? I think there is a bit of a problem with her connection. Um, I guess she'll get back online. In the meanwhile, I would request the audience to please collect their thoughts and prepare their questions, just so that when she comes back, we can post them to her. And in the meanwhile, I will just attempt a recap of what we have just gone through in the conversation that we have had with her. Yes, she's back. Um, Akka, if you are there, could you just, I mean, I can see you there. Could you please unmute your mic?
Sorry. Okay. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm back
So
again.
we started your brother married wonderful. Then we didn't hear the rest. So
Well, she was a Muslim girl. My mother went on strike, and it shook us all because we never really thought that in a progressive family where we've had friends from every possible community, that something like this could happen. And then we realized, down the line that some one incident that she had many, many years ago while growing up in Assam during the freedom struggle, that somehow had conditioned her own thinking regarding the entire community. And the funny thing was, my mother in law, who is not educated beyond class 4, a very orthodox in that sense, Tam Bram in a 9-yard sari, we called her to Kochi, where we were staying at the time, to persuade my progressive, liberated English honors, having studied up to that, my mother, to persuade her that there was no problem. So I think what I'm actually trying to put across is that the roots of prejudice or the bigotry that we're seeing around us actually go down very deep. And it is very important from the time that you are growing up within your homes and your families and your workplaces that we talk about these things, because you suddenly get to a point where your closest friend suddenly seems like someone you don't recognize anymore. So that was point number one. There are 100 different examples I can give you, but the other one is really to take you to what happened in Delhi in 1984 after the assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and the absolutely indescribable violence and terror that was let loose on the entire Sikh community. I was working in Angkur, where we had a number of wonderful Sikh women. And when we heard what had happened, we sent them back to their homes because we somehow had a fear that something like this would happen. But what actually happened was something that literally boggled the imagination. Many of us jumped out of the comfort of our homes, defied the curfew, and went into these areas where we rescued, spoke to all those traumatized women and children who had virtually seen their menfolk decimated, burnt, and killed in the most cruel manner in front of their eyes. I worked to head a particular of these various rehabilitation camps, which were set up in Delhi. And as part of that, we had to record the testimonies of many of these women. And that called for me to go and testify ultimately and prepare and present our report before the Commission of Inquiry, the Ranganatha Mishra Commission. And I was being strongly dissuaded by everyone, particularly in our service circles, to say, don't do that, please, because it will tell adversely on your husband's career. It was the days before cell phones and the quick communication we have today. But I was able to get through to my husband, who was then commanding the fleet in Vizag. And I said, look, this is what it is, and this is what I want to do. But I am being dissuaded. What do you say? We were able to talk and we were able to discuss it. And the basic thing that he told me was, look, it's a matter of your conscience. You have worked for this now for months and years, day and night, I'm aware. If that is what your conscience tells you to do, don't worry about my career. Go ahead and do it. And I think that's a very important lesson, because I think the kind of, what shall I say, conviction and courage to do what is right and not to worry about all the other issues that might come in the way is a very important part of what must define where we are going, how we will act today as citizens. Because one begins to understand that there is a good side to the state and there is a very, very ugly side and a brutal side to the state. And we cannot any longer sit on the fence. If we are citizens and if we want to act as citizens to protect the constitution of this country, for me, there is no option but that we have to act according to that conscience, dissect, engage, interrogate everything that we see and hear, and then go out and do what you think is right. That's really the main message that I have. Before the line goes dead on me again, in all our meetings, I presume many of you understand Hindi. Is it okay if I just sing a few words of a song that actually became quite iconic for all our women's meetings, which has been composed by somebody else who's a dear friend and an icon, Kamala Bhasin. And it's called Tod Tod Ke Bandhano Ko Dekho Behne Aati Hai. How we have had to break many, many bonds in order to be able to come together, to raise our voices, and to be heard. So, whoever is there, sing along if you know this. तोड़ तोड़ के बंधनों को देखो बहने आती है, तोड़ तोड़ के बंधनों को देखो बहने आती है, ओ देखो लोगो देखो बहने आती है, ओ देखो लोगो देखो बहने आती है, आएंगी जुल्म मिटाएंगी वो तो नया जमाना लाएंगी, वो तो नया जमाना लाएंगी, तारीकी को तोड़ेंगी वो खामोशी को तोड़ेंगी. Tariki and Khamoshi, which is custom and everything and a ritual that binds us, and Khamoshi is our silence. तारीकी को तोड़ेंगी वो खामोशी को तोड़ेंगी, हाँ मेरी बहनें अब खामोशी को तोड़ेंगी, मोहताजी और डर को वो मिलके पीछे छोड़ेंगी, हाँ मेरी बहनें अब डर को पीछे छोड़ेंगी, निडर आजाद हो जाएगी, अब वो खिसक खिसक के न रोएगी, अब वो खिसक खिसक के न रोएगी. तोड़ तोड़ के बंधनों को देखो बहने आती है, तोड़ तोड़ के बंधनों को देखो बहने आती है, ओ देखो लोगो देखो बहने आती है, आएंगी जुल्म मिटाएंगी वो तो नया जमाना लाएंगी, वो तो नया जमाना लाएंगी. So in closing, the song that became the emblem during the NRC, the CAA protests, a year and a half ago, हम देखेंगे, हम देखेंगे, लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे, हम देखेंगे. Can any of you sing that fabulous Malayalam version of it? It's been translated into many languages, but anyway, I hope you will. Let's sing that together. And as I said, that's all I have to share with you today. Thanks again for asking me. And any questions, if there is time, Sonia, I hope I haven't sort of overstepped too long, but there we are. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Akka. That was truly inspiring. And fearless and free, Nidar or Azad. Those words that you mentioned, I think that is very, very important. That people have to, irrespective of their gender or their social and sexual orientations, people have to learn to think fearlessly and free. Think for justice, to be kind and good. I think that is very, very important. And with that, I would like to open the session up for questions. We do have some time. So, anybody?
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Ma'am, I'm extremely happy to be here. We have our exams tomorrow, but then Sonia ma'am had asked us to join the session, and it's been extremely helpful. I actually wanted to ask you a question.
Sure.
It is a question that I asked Sonia ma'am a couple of days ago. I don't know whether she remembers it. Well, you told us that you actually stepped in, to do your duty as a citizen to the country after you had a very stable family, after you um, well, um, when you had something to lose and you were brave enough to step up to the situation and act. Uh, we're faced with this. We're faced with the dilemma, the young people. We're faced with the dilemma of having to act, but then not knowing how to and fearing of our safety and the safety of the people around us. So, how do you think we can actually muster up the courage to do so? I've asked the exact same question to Sonia ma'am the last day. I don't know if
Ah,
she remembers.
you know, you and I are going to have a much longer conversation. Um, you see, these words are so innocuous now. We can put down Nidar, Azad, fearless, and the whole freedom. But it's a long, long, tough struggle. I think that's the first thing that I have to say. It's not like some lightning strikes you from up above and you one day you were timid and you were conformist and you were frightened and the next day suddenly you have transformed into something else. It never works like that. I think if I am to answer that for myself, and maybe that's the best thing is to look at one's own personal experience, I think it's a measure of what really, really pushes you at a very deeply gut level, which then, you can then translate that. And there's a point beyond which you can't really hold back any longer. I think it has to begin somewhere with a very deep personal, internal push. I think the second thing I would say is, sorry, you didn't give me your name.
Ma'am, my name is Ruma.
Ruma.
Rima. Ruma.
Okay, okay, Ruma. The second thing I think is always to understand that this is not a fight or a struggle that you're fighting alone. Get a few of those who think like you do to actually talk about it, to discuss this, to figure out, well, how are we actually going to deal with this? I think, as with everything else, one has to be both tactical and strategic about which battles you're going to take up and which battles you're going to leave for the time being and then take it up later. As I said, there are no easy solutions. And when you talk about the fear that people are experiencing today more than probably at any other time, I completely empathize with you. And I really don't have, again, any simple answers to give. I think that the only thing, the only justification in my mind is if we are looking back at our incredible heritage and civilizational history, which has brought us to a point where, so many good things have happened. I feel very strongly and very deeply that I will not allow any bigoted, autocratic, dictatorial movement to actually destroy the democracy that we have tried very, very hard to build. And it is that motivates me. Our own friends within service circles and other circles have very deep differences, I think, with the kind of things that we get involved with. And very often they have asked either me or my husband, gosh, aren't you afraid to be saying openly or writing letters openly? His answer is what I really want to share with you. He said, what is there to be afraid of? The worst that they can actually do is to, okay, eliminate me or eliminate us. Which, if you are able to get to a point when you say, what the heck, it doesn't matter, then I think that will help you, to find the way forward. Ruma, this is not the best answer. And as I said, I think these are discussions we need to have over a period of time, but the best I can do right now.
Yes, ma'am. I totally understand.
Actually, I
We
remember this question. Yeah, Rima, please continue.
No, ma'am. I remember how we rounded the conversation off the other week. I mean, I told you that if I'd, be scared of the situation, and if I keep on hiding, then who is going to do it? Who else is going to do it if I don't take the initiative? That's how we rounded the conversation off. I remember that.
Well, that's a
Yes.
very inspiring answer. I keep saying, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? And as I said, this wonderful young woman, what's her name? Disha Ravi,
Yes.
who has, I think, has been quite remarkable as a role model for young people. And I think, again, one has to take an example also from the support that she has got from her parents and her family and friends. I see a question which has just popped up, and I saw this dear friend called Sridhar Rajan, who has been one of my very dear friends, comrades. I don't know what else to say. We worked together in those dark days in Delhi in 1984. And I think his question is, Sridhar, how do we co-opt men to become allies with us in this entire struggle? And I think that is an absolutely core and key question, which I was going to be, wanting to touch upon. I realize it's wonderful to be able to talk to an audience of just women, but quite honestly, I think these are issues that concern us as men and women. And somewhere down the line, uh, I mean, sooner rather than later, we need to engage boys and women because they too are actually victims of patriarchy in a very different sense. They are victims of a kind of socialization which actually does never allow them to be human, to feel that yes, they can cry, to say that they can feel pain, or to say, hey, listen, I actually like to do jadu chindi and housework and cooking. I'm very happy for my wife to go out and work, in an office or do something else. But it is treated as something which is demeaning, not becoming of your manhood. And I think, therefore, what needs to be done really is a whole longer process of education in the right sense of the word with both boys and girls. And honestly, I think we have to start nearly at the cradle, but in the primary school, and then take it on beyond that. That's the only long-term answer, Sridhar, and to the others who might empathize with that question. And many people are doing it. Let me tell you, I think that is a good thing that's happening. Women's groups are working increasingly with men's groups. There are men's groups who are partnering in really trying to get both boys and girls, men and women, to examine some of these very deep-rooted, intransigent kind of, mindsets, beliefs, which are not going to go away that easily.
Thank you, Akka. We have another question from Savita,
Yeah.
who is asking, what do we do when parents discriminate, between castes? And, how do they try to convince their parents, particularly when they try to correct them, they say girls shouldn't talk back.
Didn't I start my presentation with something like that? You see, when we talk about socialization and conditioning, this is part of it, and it is the toughest part of it, which is why I keep saying that some of our work going forward actually has to be in the non-dramatic, small scale, within the village, within the family, and to discuss it in a manner that does not make somebody feel either ashamed or then lead to anger as a response. But I think to get them to understand with a little more of a more scientific or a rational explanation, for instance, regarding perhaps the caste system, regarding the set of beliefs that so many of us were actually, born into and one actually totally accepted. I mean, whether it's a way that we treat widows, for instance. My own sister-in-law was widowed at a very, very young age. And what I saw at that time, and I was a very young wife, and I just didn't have that kind of courage at that time to say, no, I will not allow this, whether it's removal of a bindi or breaking of a bangle or not being allowed to be part of so many ceremonials and so on. These are things which we have inherited because we have never been encouraged to ask the question why. And which is why I keep saying we have to go back to the kindergarten, to the primary school, to training and working with teachers to say, hey, listen, let kids question. That is the way that you are really going to be able to get, to break many of these demons, which are still part of an old civilization has a lot of strengths, but these are also some of the weaknesses that we actually have to deal with. It may not help you, Savita, immediately, but again, get hold of perhaps your teacher or some other person, an older person who can come and sit down and talk about it.
Thank you, Akka. Now, Zehra, one of our students, is asking us
Yeah,
how, oh yeah, Savita has been struggling with this for some
yeah,
days.
yeah.
And Zehra was saying that wants to know how she can change society's perception of women who speak up and fight for their rights, and they are characterized as shameless or arrogant. So that's something that we have been seeing in our image in societies, because
Yeah.
in Kerala, feminists are derogatively referred to as feminicis, and they are
Yes,
called
yes.
feminists,
Every
and people are called
every
fight women.
language has got their own words for this. you know, something chi, kuppa chi, feminist chi, something chi. That's all we will keep saying. Okay, what I'm most tempted to do, Zaira, is to send you. I don't know whether you've seen this. Just yesterday, while I was actually working on today's presentation, somebody posted a picture of this amazing 89-year-old woman who is today one of the best leading sharpshooters in the country. She is from Western UP, one of the most retrograde, backward sort of areas in the country. And there she is. That's right. Thank you, Chandro Tomar. Somebody's put the answer up there. And see, this is how I suppose at one level the fight has to be an individual fight. And each one of us has to figure out, as I said, tactics and strategies and how to deal with it. I think at another level, peer pressure of a different kind is also terribly important to try and maybe persuade, uh, you know, parents who really, through no fault of their own, have grown up believing that this is what is the reality of their religion tells you that, society tells you that, the elders tell you that. I told you this story about my brother and wanting to marry a Muslim girl and my mother going on strike. And my party amma, who's a tambram, as I said, in her 9-yard sari, we flew her down from Madras to Kochi. Eventually, she persuaded my mother to say, என்னடி உன்னோட பையன் அந்த பொண்ணு நன்னா இருக்கா, isn't she a nice girl, உன்னோட பையனுக்கு சந்தோஷம் இருக்கணுமா இல்லையா, then why are you worried? And then we realized that my mother was so fearful about what the community would say, that is actually what pushed her into taking this kind of position. It's, as I said, it's a long, slow journey. The only thing I can offer is that, Savita, if you want to get your mom and your dad, put them on to put. He says, my husband says, get a good mother-in-law, but get them onto a, I don't know, a WhatsApp or a call with them. Why don't we have a chat together? I'm very happy to do that. I've done this for many who said that, my God, we just can't manage this, and the only way is to break our relations. I know one gets pushed into that kind of a situation very often. My husband and I would probably have been divorced many, many times over if we had. Sridhar, I see you have your mask on. I bet you're grinning away behind it. Anyway, so, so that's what it is.
Thank you, Akka. I'm sure Savita would like that too. So, yes, Sridhar also says, be kind.
Correct.
That's a message that I have been, giving people also to be kind.
Yeah,
And he says, people did not choose their prejudices. That's
correct.
interesting.
Beautiful. It is true.
So,
We inherited them.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Absolutely. And I think that, we have held a number of talks, of social relevance, but this is one of those that has had maximum engagement and, people wanting to take it up from here and looking at the various possibilities. So I want to thank you, Akka, on behalf of the Gender Equality Club and the Literary and Debating Association of All Saints College and all the teachers who are part of the PG and Research Department of English All Saints, who are part of the organizing committee. For coming over, I mean, in a virtual sense, of course, but for taking so much of time and sharing those experiences with us. And I would like to mention at this point that, we would like to have you back very soon under that program that we were telling you about, the communities of practice, where we want a greater engagement with a wider community. And I'm sure that, given the opportunity, our students will be more than willing to. So what we are looking into the future is a kind of a collective that can show the way forward with regard to bringing about actual change, the grassroots level upwards. So on that note, I want to thank you and everybody who has been with us at this point of time. Your presence has been invaluable and extremely encouraging, and we look forward to your presence and support for the other talks that will be coming up in the last Bastion series.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and all of you who have really patiently, sat through and listened. And more particularly, that there have been questions. Sometimes there is this embarrassing silence, and everybody goes away, not saying anything. And I think that's an indicator for me that I think we have touched on a note which is important, which resonates with all of us. And as I was telling Sonia, if we can do something like this with a number of other institutions across the country, that is one way where we can possibly break some of these barriers that seem to be facing in terms of communication, in terms of showing dissenting opinions. And I think that that is something that possibly some of us ought to explore. And I'd be happy to, to talk about it with you and to see what we can do going forward. Okay, then, Sonia, I will, and I have to give
So that
back.
brings us to the end of today's session.
Yeah.
Uh,
And if you know what I would love to have, Sonia, if possible, some of those who have asked the questions
sure.
and who want to perhaps
Yes.
be part of a group going forward, I would certainly be very happy to have their names and, any contact information. And maybe we can see, how that can be worked out. Some kind of a small study circle kind of an idea. Okay, then.
Certainly, I think we can work that out. We can work that out.
Okay.
So I'll be in touch with regard to that.
All right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sridhar. Yeah. All right, then. So we'll call it a day for the time being. Thank you very, very much.
And don't forget, it's not ma'am, it's akka. I see all the thank you ma'ams coming up. And do send me the recording, Sonia, at whatever point.
I will, definitely. I will definitely do it.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you very much, Miss
Bye.
Sylvia. We will get back. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Signing off.
Thank you.
What is the number of participants?
1 second. Thank you, Akka. They're all now coming up.
There, now it's all pouring in. Look at
Yes,
that.
I can see that. Anyway, but you see, ma'am was also part of our conditioning, don't forget. Okay. righty. I think we can now leave.
Switch off.
Yeah.
Yeah, extreme right. You'll
Well.
leave. What?
Thank you, Akka. I will get in touch.
All right. How does one leave, or will you sort of do that?
I will exit. I will exit. No
Okay.
problem.
All right. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
You too. You too. Bye bye. And everybody says it was a fruitful discussion.
Okay.
Fun troop.
Yeah, this is somebody called.